Welcome to The New Next, a podcast that addresses current events and how they will impact the future. Co-hosted by the inquisitive public speaking champion, Mike McVeigh, and energy, economics, and technology expert, Matt Jensen. Join us as we explore all things energy, economic, tech, and political, and how they will affect our future. I'm going to stay on Ukraine for just a second, or Russia and Ukraine for just a second. So it's probably not a surprise to many of our listeners that the U.S. has been the largest supplier of military aid for Ukraine with the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict. It looks like we've been providing around, or at least at the time of the article, up to $15.2 billion in weapons packages since February. But the U.S. is starting to run out of giving out weapons. And this is an article that came from CNBC, and I think one of the things that actually stood out to me the most is during peacetime, we usually make a production level of about 30,000 rounds per year in peacetime, the U.S. does. And that's how much the Ukrainian soldiers have gone through an average of every 2 weeks since February.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so, of course,
ammo is getting expensive.
Well, it's always expensive. But the interesting thing is like, they're like, well, so what does this mean? Does this mean the U.S.? The article actually has more to do with what does this mean for the U.S. as opposed to Ukraine, which is interesting. Again, how our news is so centered on it's like a reverse clickbait, but unless the U.S. is able to produce more, it would have to actually dip in its own stock supply. So the U.S. right now still has plenty of, if we were having to fight an artillery war, we have more than what we need. That 30,000 we made for our year, we've already got in our group on top of what we already consume or whatever we hold on to.
We have a lot of weapons.
Yes. And the Pentagon has made it very clear that we will not be donating any of our personal stock to Ukraine. So for those of you that are worried, which I don't think any of you have been, but we're safe right now. However, what it looks like, so we've been using 155 millimeter howitzers, and we're going to have to downgrade what we give them to 105 millimeter howitzer, which shortens the amount of ammo that can be stocked up, and the range is not as long either. Mm-hmm. And this is actually causing more problems than I would have thought. If I would have read this, I was like, oh, okay, well, they're just using a little bit more outdated. But, looking at our guns and stuff, when I see movies and things like, so you can't use your Glock, you just have to use a good old 6-shooter pistol. Sure. No, it's going to be different, but you still get the basic same effect. No, apparently this is considered an artillery war. So how far the gun can shoot makes significant difference on how well Ukraine is able to defend itself.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just kind of weird. That term alone, I'm thinking, wait a minute, aren't we in 2022? Why are we doing an artillery war? I mean, like, what?
Yeah,
what? This isn't one of those things like people are coming to attack us, but it's literally somebody's being attacked right now, and guns, not droids, not drones. It's literally a land war with guns.
Yeah, which is I think interesting. We talked about. We're in the process of talking about generational theory in here. Mm-hmm. And in the fourth turning, that Howe and Strauss book, following up generations that we recently read and discussed on the podcast.
Can't hear you.
I think they talked about a land war as a possibility for one of these things, kind of like the end of the fourth turning. But it's just been really it's been bloody, and this is a war of the last century, basically. A lot of people, I think, thought we had moved more, whether good or bad, into kind of like this drone warfare and cyber warfare, new phase of the world, and it's really been interesting to see how brutal and almost like like seeing people use off-the-shelf drones and rigging them up with explosives and stuff like that. It's kind of it's just wild. It's almost like a backwoods battle.
Yeah, and for those of you that are more concerned about Ukraine than our own personal weapon stock, they do have some options. They're not good options. It might actually be better. Our backup options might actually be better than their first options. South Korea is a potential place for supplies. They recently signed a contract with Poland for $5.7 billion worth of tanks and howitzers. But they're saying already that those weapons are actually less optimal than potentially even our 105 millimeter howitzers, which is kind of interesting. I mean, in that right alone, again, it's not a secret that the U.S. spends a lot more on defense and military type things, but again, I think that's something that I take for granted of, movies and TV ruin a lot of stuff. And we just like, oh, everybody has the same weapons. And no, they don't. An AK-47, and I really don't even know what level of newness and how often they repair those, but those are probably 20 years ago, and we keep on talking about them like they're accurate today or something. But yeah, and I think that's one thing, you mentioned about the fourth turning, but even just generational thinking as a whole. It's not so much that history repeats itself as this is then, or now is then, and this is that. And you can definitely take a lot of that thinking and apply it to multiple situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, the U.S. funding for Ukraine, I think, has been more than Russia's entire military funding last year. So it's the West is funding. It's definitely a proxy war, that's for sure.
Right. If you would like to learn more about the New Next podcast, find us at thenewnextpodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic you would like for us to cover. If you enjoyed what you heard, share the podcast, tell a friend about it, or rate us with 5 stars.